On today's Newsmakers, Roma Downey's faith, an ex-psychic's warning, and persecution rising in Nigeria. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable figures. On today's Newsmakers, we start with ex-psychic Jen Niza, who is issuing a dire warning after Fox News' Jesse Waters recently brought a tarot card reader on the air. Here is Jen Niza. Jen Niza, it's been a little bit of time since you and I have gotten together to talk about some of the issues we see happening in culture, particularly when it comes to the New Age, to the occult. There was a very strange moment this week on Fox News where a psychic tarot card reader was brought in to do readings around the 2024 election surrounding Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Before we get into what happened on Fox itself, the woman who came on the show, her name is Paula Roberts, and I know you did a little bit of digging just into who she is. What can you tell us about her?
Yeah, she definitely seems to be in the psychic, I don't want to say the psychic game, but the psychic world for years. She takes it very seriously. She does not seem to be a huckster or a charlatan at all. She did paranormal investigation, which is also known as ghost hunting. She called herself a clairvoyant counselor. She means it. And you unfortunately can even tell that on the clip. I don't know if you thought that, Billy, but when I watched a clip of her on Fox News, you could see how serious she was about this. She is a real diviner.
What was your reaction to seeing, and we see this again and again in Hollywood, in mainstream shows, in reality TV, psychics and necromancy, all of these things happening, but what was your reaction to seeing this on a news show?
Oh, I was definitely surprised. And, you know, for example, my parents sit back and they watch Fox News and they love Jesse Waters. And I'm just thinking about people like my parents, people out there like my parents that are sitting home, they're retired and they're watching Fox News and then they're being exposed to divination. And I thank God that my parents know that it's wrong because of my life and my testimony. But many people are not aware and may think it's entertainment. And I was really disappointed to see a news program pushing this out there and even making light of it, making it seem like it's just entertainment and a joke and it's funny and no big deal. That's not what it is. And it doesn't matter if you think it's entertainment or not. The outcome is going to be the same because it really is demonic.
Let's talk about that, right? Because you just gave that warning that, you know, this is really a demonic practice. And you mentioned a couple of things there. Some people might laugh it off. You know, it might be made light of. Oh, let's just do this. It's a parlor trick. It's fun. Let's talk about the real danger here of this, because what was happening in that segment, she was using something called tarot cards. So let's start there. Tarot cards, you know, they look like a card deck, like a regular card deck, but they're not quite just a regular card deck, are they?
No, not at all. Although that was the intention back in I think it was the late 15th century, a card game in Italy called tarocchi, but actually got into the hands of an occultist. And that was when those pictures started getting channeled, interpretations were getting channeled in the occult. Okay. So what that means is that card is a piece of cardboard with a painting on it that has no knowledge about you, has no wisdom in your life, has no power to do anything but the demonic forces that you are now inviting because you're practicing divination. You're seeking those cards for esoteric knowledge. So you have entered into divination. You've opened demonic doors, and it's the demonic entities that are providing the information through like I said, through the interpretations and the little books that come with the tarot cards. There's a little pamphlet in there. That's the, meanings of the cards. And then the psychic themselves are receiving extra information clairvoyantly while they are doing these readings. But those cards know nothing about you.
Yeah, it's about the force that you're tapping into, right? You know, similar with, the Ouija board and these other tools that, there's a whole history to the Ouija board that's complex and strange and disturbing. But these are tools that are used to channel. And you did this, again, professionally. For those who will say, oh, it's not true, it's all made up, What would you say coming out of that lifestyle, what you experienced, what you saw to help them understand the severity of engaging in this sort of activity?
When you enter into divination, you are bound to get the consequences that come with it. And of course, I didn't know at the time. I thought I was helping people, but I entered into the demonic realm and I had anxiety. I had destruction all around me, which I wouldn't have credited to demons, of course. Except there were times that I saw very evil things. I saw demons manifest. I was heavily afflicted. Demonic oppression is a result of entering into these readings, getting into these readings. It's not a game. It's not a parlor trick. And even out there with the charlatans and the hucksters or whatever, you're still entering into it. So you're opening the demonic door. And I think it's important for people to know, well, why are you saying it's demonic? Why can't it be something good? Because God condemns it. He's clear about that. So it's not a gift from God. So some people, Billy, think it's either entertainment or they have a gift. And this is just to help people and to guide people. But Satan masquerades as an angel of light. So he's going to make it look one way, even like a joke. However, he has to do it to deceive you, to lead you. And I know I kind of added on to your question.
No, it's great.
We live in a culture right now and a time where there's so much tension, where there's so much anxiety. There's not peace in the nations. There's a lot of things going on, and people really want to know things.
Well, Jen, as always, I appreciate you taking the time today.
Oh, thanks, Billy. It's always a pleasure. God bless you.
You can hear more from Jen Niza by subscribing to her podcast, Ex-Psychic Saved. Up next, we'll be exploring the rising tides of persecution raging in Nigeria. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Our next guest is Jeff King. He is the president of International Christian Concern, and he joins us today to discuss the horrific situation in Nigeria and the response to the Biden administration's decision not to list Nigeria on the State Department's countries of particular concern list. Let's welcome Jeff to Newsmakers. So, Jeff, the U.S. has again decided not to add Nigeria to the State Department's countries of particular concern recommendations. Can you, just before we get into the finer details of this, what is this designation? What does it actually mean?
Yeah, I think, Billy, probably the easiest way to say it is it's a list of the countries with the worst records on religious freedom around the world.
And Nigeria, I mean, you can't turn around without a horrific report of persecution at this point coming out of Nigeria. In fact, over Christmas Eve, a very horrific attack that claimed well over 100 lives there and impacted many others. Take us through what it is like right now to be a Christian inside of Nigeria.
Well, and maybe we'll pull back and let's look at the 20-year view. So starting 20 years ago, basically Christians started getting driven out of their villages at gunpoint, at machete point. Armed attackers would come in. They're from a tribe called the Fulanis. They'd come in. They would machete and shoot everybody, burn the place to the ground. And that's happened over and over and over for the last 20 years, to the point that there's 3.5 million Christian farmers that have been pushed off their land. Maddening number. And no one knows the real number. I say up to 100,000 Christians murdered in that time. And then that whole time, you know, the Nigerian government says, gosh, this is a complicated problem. It's so hard to find these people. They're out in the bush. Nothing ever happens. So day to day, you're wondering if you're a Christian in Nigeria and you're out in the bush, you're wondering if your village is next and whether you're going to live through the night.
I mean, and this is especially horrific for a lot of reasons, but you look at the situation here, it's not as though there are no Christians in Nigeria, right? You just mentioned over 3 million when it comes to land and 100,000. This is a country where around half of the country essentially is Christian. And so some might say, well, wait a minute, how in the world can you have a situation where there are that many believers and yet you're still having this level of persecution?
Yeah, and very complex question, or the answer is very complex. And Nigeria, let's say, you know, the top half of the country is Muslim, the bottom half is Christian. And the battleground has all been the middle ground, Billy, as you know. What started in the north, they drove the Christians out of the north, and that was like Boko Haram, and they pushed them down, and now they're taking the Christians out of the middle belt. And so the main area of Christians in Nigeria, the south, has not been affected to a great degree. It's starting to go down in the south, but it's mostly been the middle. So as Christians get more and more attacked in the south, we'll probably see more of an uprising. But at the same time, it's a powder keg. When you've got 3.5 million people, and think how many men, unemployed men, that were driven unjustly off their land. So this is a powder keg waiting to happen. So just because nothing has happened, it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. But the broad thing is, again, Muslim North, Christian South. The Christian South has still not been largely affected.
And you have a situation here coming back to America, right, where you have the countries of particular concern. You have this list. You have the most powerful country in the world being able, I would imagine, to put some form of pressure on the Nigerian government, because the other question here that people will have is, well, why aren't government officials, why aren't authorities, police doing anything to stop this? And why is this continuing to happen? What is your message right now? If you had the Biden administration in front of you, the State Department, what would you say to them?
I would say 100,000 deaths, 3.5 million Christian farmers driven off their lands. This is a slow motion genocide. It's a slow motion jihad. What does it take for the United States to use what they're best at? Just and the administration use the bully pulpit to speak up and to stand for those who are oppressed, to stand for the defenseless. That's all we have to do, and call a spade and talk about what's going on in Nigeria and the failure of successive Nigerian governments to deal with this. And the hidden story in all this, Billy, I'm going off the talking point or what you asked, but it's really because Muslims are in control of the army, the intel agencies, and the police. And that's why nothing ever happens. It's an inside job.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you went off the script there, because that is part of what I was saying. You have two issues here. You have their government not doing anything, and now you have the U.S. government, the most powerful government in the world, at least not publicly taking action by putting Nigeria on this list. And so the question then emerges, what's going on behind the scenes? Is there any pressure actually happening that we know of? And a lot of this is speculative, but I do need to mention the Trump administration did place Nigeria on this list and gave it this designation for 1 year, and I believe, and then it was taken off by the Biden administration. What do you make of the reasons that you think are driving the U.S. position on this at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, on the one hand, Billy, you've got the long-term problem of what the State Department does. The State Department gets the law, right? And so, to the point that Congress created legislation, they created a gadfly to push the State Department on this type of issue. And that was the creation of USERF, if people know what that is. But the Congress said, look, the State Department is ineffective on this issue, and we need to have a watchdog and a gadfly to push them. So look, they exist to get along. Another level of answer is oil. Nigeria has a lot of oil, so they get a different consideration than a lot of countries. But apart from all that, like I said, this is a powder keg. It is a disaster waiting to happen. If it ever goes to civil war, which sooner or later it will, you can only kill so many people and steal their land without them rising up. And if it ever goes to civil war, you have a refugee problem that dwarfs everything else we've seen. Nigeria is the largest, most populous country in Africa. So it behooves the U.S. government to get involved and to deal with this problem before it gets worse.
Well, I appreciate that. Get informed. That is a great place for us to close here. Appreciate you taking the time today and coming on.
Wonderful. I so appreciate your work. Thank you.
Please keep praying for Nigeria, for our leaders, for the leaders there, and for all the people undergoing what they are facing right now. We'll be back on the other side of the break with actress Roma Downey. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we are sitting down with actress Roma Downey to talk all about faith, overcoming pain and her new children's book. Without any further ado, let's welcome Roma to Newsmakers. Roma, you have an incredible new children's book, A Message in the Moon. And I know there's a really powerful story behind this book, the roots that were set for you to write it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Billy, this story for this book has sat in my heart for a really long time. As people may know, my mother died when I was just a little girl. I was only 10. And so my relationship with my father was especially close because he became a single parent to me and he was a great dad. And now you fast forward about 7 or 8 years and I'm getting ready to leave Ireland to go to university in England. And I'm anxious about leaving my dad. And, it's back in the day before there was a cell phone, if you can imagine such a thing. And so Dad took me outside into the garden and he pointed to the moon and he said, wherever you are in the world, Roma, you don't need to feel anxious or alone because it's the same moon that will be shining down on us. And wherever you are, wherever you go, I'm going to leave a message in the moon for you. And so, I took great comfort when I'd be walking home from college back to my lodging house. And I'd glance up and I'd see the moon and I would pick up the message from my dad and I would know that my dad loved me and cared for me. And unfortunately, my dad passed away while I was in college and I was very anxious and nervous about looking at the moon, sure that it would be empty of his loving messages, but I needn't have worried, Billy, because to this day, all these years later, my father still leaves me messages in the moon. He's just leaving them from the other side of the moon. Anyway, so this story has been sitting and growing and tugging at my heart for all these years. And I kept thinking, there must be a nugget in this story that would make a beautiful and powerful story for young children, particularly children perhaps who are anxious about any kind of separation, if mom's going off to work or if grandma's moving across the country, your best friend doesn't live here anymore, all the myriad of reasons perhaps that a young child might feel some anxiety, that we could use the moon as this central source, this light source, to shine down love and reassurance into the kids, into the kid's heart, into the kid's life. And so that's what I created here with Holly Hayden, who I have to give a shout out to, who did these beautiful illustrations for A Message in the Moon. And it just came out last month. It's doing very well, I'm happy to say, and people are starting to buy it now as a Christmas gift for their children or for their grandchildren or for some little kid down the street. But, and for me, it just was a lovely way to honor my daddy, all these years later. And, my kids, as they've grown up, knowing this story firsthand, Riley, my daughter, she could be traveling for work or she's on a vacation or something, and I'll get a text where she'll send me a photograph of the moon and she'll say, "Mom, look up, I left you a message." And so we kind of use it as a sweet connector. And, I mention in the book, Billy, that a reminder that the moon has no light source because the moon is only a reflection of the sun's light. But imagine if all the things the moon absorbed was love, and then the moon did what the moon does and just reflect all that love back to the planet.
Yeah.
Well, there's something in that I find very touching.
That's incredible. And, just going back to what you were saying about your dad, I mean, he must have been a really incredible person, after losing your mom, being that central figure, in your life and that relationship that you built. I would imagine you learned a lot about life and obviously very difficult things in that loss of both of them. But what lessons did God teach you in that? Because it's such an important formative piece of your story.
Yes. Well, I mean, to say that we were heartbroken would be an understatement because we didn't even have the preparation of illness, you know, which I know can be traumatic and painful for a child to see their parents suffer and go through a long illness. But my mother just dropped dead, you know, there was no warning. And so it was as if somebody just turned the lights out in our lives. I mean, I often think back to that time, and you know, if my childhood, if I was making a movie of my own life, my childhood would be in full Technicolor. And then when my mother died, it's as if the movie then went into black and white. You know, we were just so heartbroken. And I honestly know if we hadn't had faith to lean into, if we hadn't been people of faith, I don't know how we would have coped. I really don't know. I mean, sure, we feel the pain of death like everybody else, but as Christians and as believers, we have an understanding of the promises of Christ around this issue, and the promise of heaven and the resurrection of the body and all the things that we've been taught and believe. And so I have no doubt that one day I shall be in some form reunited with the people that I love, who I have lost, you know, and that was the blessing that came out of that pain.
Well, Roma, as always, I appreciate everything you do, your time. The book is A Message in the Moon. People can go out and grab that for Christmas, for their kids, their grandkids. Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Billy. I appreciate talking to you, and I hope you and yours have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas.
You can get Roma's book, A Message in the Moon, wherever books are sold. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. That's all for today's Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you can find the full interviews you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can also check out our new daily Newsmakers podcast. On that show, we have one full interview every single day. You can subscribe over on your favorite podcast platform. We'll see you again next week here on Newsmakers.